properly, son of the soil.
It's fine.
Thank you. Good evening to you also, Africa Nikiwa, Mabunda. Good evening also to Onyesunu. See that you are also on the platform. We really were pleased to be hosting this platform as the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania, in particular Gerald Gondo branch in Tshwane in the occupied Azania. I'm going to be assisting or be assisted by my fellow comrade Mafrika Nyikiwa as the Deputy Branch Secretary of Gerald Gondo in these proceedings. And we will be exchanging in terms of the facilitation of the entire program.
Good evening, comrade. Once again, like comrade just said, welcome you to this commemoration of Africa Liberation Month, as we are commemorating the compromise of 1963, when both the Monrovia and Casablanca blocks decided to compromise. And when they compromised, they decided that let us form the African, the Organization of African Unity, in order to try to unify Africa by whatever means possible, even though they have their differences as well. Comrades, let us start like this. Can we first have Africa Mulibati, the chairperson of Gauteng Province, PAC, give us his presentation, and then we can interact after his presentation. Thank you.
Isolate.
Africa.
Comrades Chair, Mafrika Mpai, Mabote, and Mafrika Nyikiwa, Mabunda, and members of the panel. Are you still there?
Yes, we are here. We are here.
Okay, thank you very much. Something happened to the site. It nearly destroyed me, but I had to hold strong. Thank you very much for hosting this. Without any waste of time, in my preparation of this and pondering, I thought that I had to apply myself to the topic that says Africa Liberation Day, 25th May, Azania. So I might have to be corrected if my interpretation is not correct, but I themed it as such in terms of saying African liberation, Quo Vadis, where to? My understanding is that for now, in terms of the historical background, especially the All Africa meeting in Accra in December 1958, it was almost like the last step towards the 1963 meeting. But I think between 58 and 63, a lot of things happened. And we need to understand that as the founding fathers of the PAC say in the Pan-Africanist case, that we are faced with various forces. Internally, it's the settlers, and externally is the imperialists. Then West, but now China has joined. So I think it is our understanding that in 1963, there were two forces, as we normally call them, the Casablanca and the Monrovia forces, and that actually 1963 was just a compromise. So later on, when the Organization of African Unity became the AU, the situation moved from bad to worse. So where are we today? We are in the worst case in terms of African unity. However, as our founding fathers would say, you first have to locate the problem and then identify its weaknesses. And we come to the arrival and understanding that in any situation, especially in Africa, power rests with the African masses. So it is the responsibility of each and every one of these African countries that were created, or whose boundaries were created by the Berlin Conference, to start their own movements, which would become a concrete expression of, or a concrete organizational expression of Africanism, which is going to take the shape and scope of Pan-Africanism. So African nationalism, which we as members of the PAC are well acquainted with and are still struggling with currently in occupied Azania, has to be the premise, the international premise that all African countries have to be driven towards, in terms of saying, unite and rally the African people under the banner of African nationalism. So we need to practice locally, but preach internationally, that is continentally, so that African countries in their own concrete conditions have to understand, as the PAC says, that we need to view our common problems from one perspective of a colonized Africa and one enemy that is called imperialism. So in a nutshell, without taking a lot of time, I thought I should just give heads of argument with regard to just setting the scene alight. Isoleto.
Okay, thank you, African Liberty, for being so short and setting the scene. It's good that we actually succeed that we should meet today and discuss our paramount this month, or the activities of this month in 1963 actually led us to being here. And then after African Liberty, can we please have Africa Sobukwe Shakura to also give us his presentation, and then we can interact after him.
All right, just moderator, can we know how long we should present?
Okay, can I give you 20 minutes?
Okay. Comrades, certainly much has been said and already mentioned about the OAU and the beginning of the OAU in 1963. But of course, we know the commemoration goes back to what our honorable member of the PAC said. It actually starts from the All African Peoples Conference. It's there that the concept, or the African Freedom Day, was actually founded. African Freedom Day was renamed after the founding of the OAU, Organization of African Unity, and it was renamed African Liberation Day. But the All African Peoples Conference, as was stated earlier, is a continuation of the ideas that came out of the Fifth Pan-African Congress, which clearly stated that it was anti-imperialist, it was for the total unification of Africa, and it was moving towards scientific socialism. This is what came out of that Fifth Congress. And this is what was carried on in the All African Peoples Conference, the first Pan-African conference held, the All African Peoples Conference, which follows the Conference of African States that became the continuation of the Pan-African Congresses. It was the first, like I said, Pan-African Congress on the continent of Africa. And it's very important because if we think of the African Liberation Day as a commemoration of the founding of the OAU, then we lose something. we lose the real meaning of this process of liberation. And even when we understand what was the reasons behind the compromise to hold the Organization of African Unity, we must understand that it did not stop the liberation struggle. In fact, those wiser heads at the meeting really understood, those who were in the Casablanca group understood that it would be less productive to have some kind of civil strife between these countries that were still fighting for liberation. The armed struggles were beginning in the southern tip of Africa, and in the former Portuguese colonies of Angola, Mozambique, Guinea-Bissau. So this was important for there not to be a overall disunity, a struggle between the two groups that were described, the Monrovia group, the Casablanca group. Those who were staunchly against imperialism in the Casablanca group wanted to continue to be able to aid, which they had always been doing, those forces that were fighting in every corner of the African continent against imperialism. They understood that even if they could not have the total victory that they wanted in terms of the total liberation and unification of Africa, immediately under scientific socialism, that they could at least help to set up that African Liberation Committee. That African Liberation Committee would serve as a body or a force to help to aid those forces that were actually still under colonialism. And this is what we have to keep citing. The OAU was indeed not what the Pan-African forces, the really revolutionary forces, were looking for. Those forces that had been gathered together at the All African Peoples Conference, those forces were clear that they were fighting for the total liberation of the continent. When we think about who was there at that conference, when we think about Frantz Fanon, when we think about Lumumba, when we think about all the forces that were brought together there to start to study on how to liberate the rest of the continent. Well, this is what, again, those forces who were anti-imperialists stayed within the framework and of the Organization of African Unity to make it still be a force that would not neutralize the struggle of the people. And we have to understand now that the struggle, the national liberation struggle in Africa was conducted not by one single nation, state. It was always in conjunction with other forces, the forces in other countries that either had been liberated or were coordinating activity with their fellow states. When we look at the struggle in Southern Africa, when we think of the struggle, particularly in Azania, South Africa, and when we think about the struggle in Zimbabwe, we have to think about what forces, what states were aiding them, giving them resources, giving, besides the OEU, but those forces who were these states like Tanzania and Libya and others who gave actual places for training, gave material aid, besides what they were contributing to the OAU. So this struggle didn't come to a halt, even though we know the compromise took place at the OAU. The two forces came to stop their outward feud and contain it within a structure in which they could continue, the aid could continue to happen. We are now, of course, in a situation where neocolonialism has emerged. And many of the forces, many of the Casablanca forces were attacked brutally for their aid to these liberation forces. They took, the brunt force of imperialism. We know that Guinea Conakry, which was aiding during that period the forces in Mozambique and Guinea-Bissau and Angola. They took an invasion. Guinea-Conakry was invaded by the forces of the Portuguese and mercenaries that they had trained, and also with the full backing of NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. They were clear, and they were which side they were on. So Guinea-Bissau and Mozambique and Angola also formed concept. They came together to bring their military strategies and tactics together to fight against the enemy. We know that many forces were killed. We know even though Guinea-Bissau was able to reach its liberation, we know on that path that Amilcar Cabral was assassinated, Titina Silla was assassinated, much of the leadership was assassinated. Now this, of course, we know the story of Lumumba. Lumumba was assassinated. We know that many of the forces who were in that struggle were killed, some of them overthrown. So the forces of neocolonialism came to start to dominate, where they had already been in force because the forces that rose in the Monrovia group and in some of the other factions, Brazzaville, all of these factions were helped to power mostly by the imperialist forces in France and Britain and other places. So we know that neocolonialism was already on the continent, but it was able to turn back much of the liberation struggle. So today we have to ask ourselves, the OU has reduced the term African Liberation Day to Africa Day, as if we were already liberated. And we have to, again, turn to what Amilcar Cabral teaches us. He taught us that national liberation, you didn't have national liberation until you had freed your means of production, your resources, the things that you needed to produce. If you had not gone forward to be able to now sustain yourself and produce like you did before the colonial forces came to the continent, then of course you were no longer, you could not call yourself free, even if you liberated a government offices and stuck a flag in the ground. And the faces of the government now look like us, but still were tied to the economic foreign domination. So this is where Africa is as a whole. We're all, even the most progressive forces in Africa are tainted or dominated by neocolonialism. And of course, we know still, even though we have freed large swaths from settler colonialism, we certainly have not yet turned over the resources to the masses of the people. In most places, we have not even had land reclamation in settler colonies. It is only Zimbabwe that we can say that it has had some kind of land reclamation to turn resources back to the people. But on the most of the continent, we know that we are still struggling to defeat neocolonialism, and certainly in places like Kenya, South Africa, or Azania, South Africa, and places like that, that there's still the dominant land, and the best land is still in the hands of the colonizers, the settlers, those who took our land in the first place. So when we talk about many fronts today, when we talk about African Liberation Day, and we can never accept the notion of Africa Day, because Africa Day, again, it would lead us to believe that we are liberated and all we're doing is celebrating the day that we chose to commemorate our liberation. This is what Africa Day implies. The AAPRP and many other organizations who are revolutionary must keep open and keep the name and the notion of African liberation held high. African Liberation Day should never be reduced to the notion of just Africa Day. Now, we have many struggles going on in the African world that on this African Liberation Day should pay close attention to. We have to look at the situation in Southern Africa and Azania as we look more and more closely at those who are calling for land reclamation. We have to look at the forces that are calling for end to neoliberal and neocolonial forces that dominate the landscape. We have to look at these notions of forces that are fighting to maintain a control over the wealth and not change the material conditions of the masses of the people. That's one front. We have to look at the fronts in places like Kenya and places where they are trying to enlarge the government, but not deal with questions like land reclamation for the masses of the people. We have to look at the places in the world like Colombia, where the third largest African population in the Western Hemisphere is, and the struggle that they are bringing against the righteous struggle that they are bringing against the corrupt government, in which they are demanding the government step down because of its corruption, because of its failure to protect the land reclamation and land control by the indigenous and the African people in Colombia. We have to look closely at the struggle in Haiti, our beloved Haiti. The Haiti, of course, was where one of the first African revolution that defeated enslavement in the Western Hemisphere, a island that reached out to every enslaved African in the 1800s, in 1804, when they liberated and said, if you get 1 foot on the Haitian soil, you will be liberated. And they also even reached out to Africa. There was now new research that shows that Haiti was reaching out to Africa in terms of being concerned on how to struggle against colonialism and struggle against the struggles and help aid the struggles in Africa. Certainly, we have to see now the people are rising. The people are rising again against this the neocolonial government that is standing there in Haiti. Now, we can go on and on. We can go to Brazil. We can talk about the largest population of Africans outside of the African continent in Brazil. There's being slaughtered by Bolsonaro, whose government is a racist, fascist, settler colonial government. And we have to certainly look at how the African continent, in terms of all of these things, in terms of how do we move forward? How do we end the struggle in Shawari, in Western Sahara, where the forces in Morocco have decided that they will no longer look at the rights of the Africans in Morocco. I mean, and Sahara. So we have to look at these things and not only look at them, but look at how do we resolve it? How do we resolve the contradiction? Well, I think we resolve the contradiction based on the historical reality that we have. This question of Pan-Africanism, revolutionary Pan-Africanism, the total liberation and unification of Africa under scientific socialism. Today, this African Liberation Day, the All African People's Revolutionary Party used the slogan "Forward Ever" to worldwide Pan-African unity. And saying that, we understand that our forces, when we look at the historical revolutionary forces that we have on the continent and the new rising forces that have stepped forward from over the years, when we look at the historical forces in Azania, with the Pan-African Congress of Azania, when we look at the Azanian People's Organization, when we look at the forces that the strong union forces, the workers' forces that help to bring about the partial liberation that we have now, how do we bring them all together? We have to organize these forces in a way that we advance ourselves. That's why we have, as a party, have always taught that we have not had a revolutionary Pan-African Congress since that Congress that took place at the All African People's Congress. We've had attempts at Congresses that did not advance at all what we need. What we need is a higher level of organization. And until we get that, we will never be able to defeat the forces of imperialism. We must understand that. And that means that not only must we understand the forces that we need to organize towards Pan-Africanism, but we also need to understand the struggles against imperialism that we have no choice but to support. Because when we think about the struggle, the righteous struggle that is going on in Palestine right now, conducted by the Palestinian people, we cannot do anything but ally with them, as we have in our historical reality, because we understand, and we always understood as an African continent, that Zionism is an imperialist force that has always been against the organization and unification of Africa. We know that they have always been involved with the retarding and undermining of African unity. They have, in every part of the African world, from the African continent to the US, everywhere, they have trained mercenaries on every continent on the face of the earth to undermine the progress against imperialism. They've trained mercenaries in Brazil, in other Central and South American countries. They certainly were on the side of the imperialist forces in Azania. They undermined in the US the Africans' processes of organizing themselves, from deciding helping to decide the leadership among the Africans in the US by buying off politicians and forcing politicians not to speak out against Zionism, not to speak out in favor of the Palestinians. So we know Zionism is a main imperialist enemy. And everywhere we are, we have to organize against it. So I don't want to talk too long. I do want to move to questions and answers, or whatever the rest of the format is. But again, just in wrapping up, we have to increase our level of organization. Right now, the Black Alliance for Peace in Africans in the US and many others are organizing together against AFRICOM. AFRICOM being the latest, since 2008, has been a force that has been training in training the armies in in Africa. They've been organizing and coordinating assassinations, they coordinated the invasion of Libya. They were involved in drone strikes. They've done much damage to the African continent. They said they came to the African continent because they were coming to fight terrorism. Yet terrorism has grown fourfold since the AFRICOM trainings of African armies and since their so-called special forces that are on the African continent. They've supported mercenaries and that were trained and supported by the forces, the backward forces in the Bahrain, and the backwards forces in Kuwait, and the backwards forces in Saudi Arabia. So AFRICOM is an enemy like NATO. And when we say we want the campaign that comes out of Black Alliance for Peace is called US Out of Africa. And when we talk about US out of Africa, we're not, again, just talking about AFRICOM. We're also talking about the NATO forces and all of those mercenaries that and terrorist forces that they have trained on our continent. So we're talking about the Zionist forces that are dominating our continent. So when we say US out of Africa, we mean the US and all of its allies, its imperialist allies, all these imperialist armies and neo-colonial forces that are wreaking havoc among African people in the world. We are calling for them to come to an end. So all of our forces must join that fight. And of course, one of the leading fighters in this struggle against Zionism is the forces in South Africa and Southern Africa. So we want to make sure that we, other African forces, not just those few governments that have come together and declared a war against Zionism or said that they are in support of the Palestinians. We need this struggle to come from the bottom up. That means all of our mass organizations, all of our student organizations, all of our women's organizations across the continent should take the lead from the forces in Southern Africa and moving towards a conference and a rebuilding of the African worldwide African anti-Zionist front that was built in the early 1900s and early 1990s, I'm sorry. In the early 1990s, this worldwide African anti-Zionist front was formed in Libya, which is another reason that they wanted to get rid of Gaddafi and the forces against imperialism that were in the Mathawa. So we have to certainly not just talk about this. African Liberation Day is certainly a day for us to reflect, but it's also a day for us to be inspired and to take steps towards improving our organizational structures, our organizational alliances, so that we are more ready to defeat the forces of imperialism. And we will win. Thank you.
Thank you, Africa Sobukwe Shakura. I actually love how you related the formation of the OAU and the fifth Pan-Africanist Congress, which was held in Manchester in 1945, which was the game changer in a form of academic, as Kwame Nkrumah calls it, he said it's academic African nationalism stopped being discussed there. Then we have to start now acting upon implementing Pan-Africanism. Before we can go to the question and answers, can please have our last speaker, who's Africa John Turnbull. Africa John Turnbull, last I checked, your camera was off. Can you please switch it on?
Good evening.
Evening,
You want
Prof.
to add to the comments made, or?
You can give us a small presentation also on the tip, and then we can, after that, we'll go to making comments and having our own question and answer session here. Because from the live stream, I don't see anyone asking questions, but then we do have some questions, and which will relate us to what is to be done to make sure that we do not just commemorate African Liberation Day as it seems like we have been doing for the previous 58 years. Yeah, you can just give us that small presentation on that.
Well, let me, actually, my comrade Sobukwe has covered a number of points. I would like to add a few points. First, I'd like to focus on the importance of political education. We are in a situation where we face massive oppression. Our enemy is moving fast, has a lot of resources, and creates a lot of confusion. A good example is, I pick up the Daily Maverick, which considers itself sometimes to be a liberal newspaper here in South Africa, but it constantly creates confusion. And we see this in all of the media out there that's controlled by the capitalist forces. So what we have to do is we have to have an offensive in terms of educating ourselves, starting with the building of a revolutionary African intelligentsia. So there has to be a focus amongst all of our organizations, the PAC, ZAPO, PIGC, SWAPO, APRP. All of us have to focus in on how we can constantly educate our cadre, but also how we can reach out and politically educate the broader African community, so that we can not only have them understand the importance of Pan-Africanism, a total liberation and unification of Africa under scientific socialism, but to get people to understand how the day-to-day oppression, how the day-to-day types of violence that we're faced with is linked to the broader system of capitalism, imperialism, Zionism, and neocolonialism. So in order to do that, we have to educate ourselves. Secondly, I like to focus in on the importance of consciousness. I mean, part of this whole link to political education is we want to be more conscious, but we have to understand that it is the consciousness of us as women and men that really distinguishes us as a species. So that this consciousness is important for us to see the obligation of politically educating ourselves, but not just to a limited extent, but to advance this political education as far as possible, and this is a revolutionary level, so that we want to have a political education such that it forges in us a motivation to make this drastic improvement in society. And this drastic improvement in society is one of overthrowing capitalism and imperialism and bringing about scientific socialism. So this requires the political education to understand the devastating nature of capitalism and imperialism and understand how scientific socialism represents that alternative where the resources that are really belong to the people, but are not in the hands of the people currently under capitalism, imperialism, and neocolonialism. How under socialism, these resources are placed in the hands of the people, the working people, the communities that are actually around the natural resources that we have, that with this change where the people are in control of the resources, then the production and distribution processes will be geared to improving the lives of the people and our communities. And this is really key to socialism that will eventually bring about a society where we've heightened our consciousness and we've distributed the resources and developed the production processes to the level where we'll be able to, in our communities, contribute to the best of our ability and receive based on our need, which is the highest form of society we have envisioned so far of communism. So I'll leave it at that and open for discussion and questions.
Okay, thank you, Prof. I made a mistake in the beginning. I let Africa speak the chairperson of the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania and here in Gauteng province to just set the scene and did not allow him to Africa Mulibati, can you make further points, then from there on we can be able to ask each other questions and see what can we do in order for us to actually now stop commemorating Africa Day and finally say that we are celebrating this Africa Day that people have been long celebrating before Africa was even liberated from imperialism, neoliberalism, and neocolonialism.
Yeah, Mafrika Nyikiwa, thank you very much. I believe that my setting the scene alight was quite deliberate from the onset. It was just a question of saying 3 to 5 minutes, just provoke thought, you know, instead of going on a full-scale discourse. And what Comrade Shakura and Comrade John did was quite logical, and it's plausible that they followed that. And I think Comrade John was quite reasonable and thoughtful in saying his thoughts were covered. So Comrade Shakura in the middle sort of expanded our principles. All that I want to say is that if we acquaint ourselves with the key document of the Pan-Africanist Congress of the People of Azania, that is the Pan-Africanist Manifesto that was adopted on the 5th of April, 1959, I think that that document is very analytical. It sets the scene in terms of thesis and then the antithesis and the synthesis. Now, I'm holding it in my hand and I'm looking at Article L of the Pan-Africanist Manifesto, which speaks about social relations. Sobukwe and his peers were brilliant and gifted enough to understand that you need to conduct a concrete analysis of the concrete situation. And that would then produce to you an understanding of where we are, where we want to be, and how to get there. Now, they are very clear that the question that was confronting the people of Africa at that stage is a question that had confronted mankind from the very beginning in terms of how do you live with other people in peace and harmony. So Article M then becomes the core of it all that sets out the historic mission, which is the complete independence or the complete freedom or the complete liberation of Africa. Now, as the PAC in Gauteng, we've been very clear that our analysis of complete freedom means political freedom, economic freedom, social freedom, and military freedom. Military in the sense that whatever gains political, whatever gains social, whatever gains economic you have made, you need to protect them. Now, we'll recall that at the All Africa Conference in Accra in December 58, where you had giants like Ntsumukhehle of the Basutoland Congress Party, one would recall that when he said, if you want to liberate Africa in toto or in patio, you must liberate South Africa. And Nkrumah asked, who is that? And people said, no, it's Mokhehle from Lesotho. Now, if you look at the mountain kingdom, small as it is, nobody ever even anticipated or thought that you could have a giant like Ntsumukhehle. Now, Ntsu means eagle. Now, the PAC was formed in Lesotho. Potlako Kitchener Leballo was a member of the Basutoland Congress Party. Now, why am I going there? We know that as scientific socialists, our analysis has to be historical so that we can know what history has given us, so that we can interpret the past, and then analyze the past, that the future, and also be able to predict that given what happened in the past and what is happening now, this is likely to happen. So Article M then tells us that our historic mission, which we don't have to forget, is the complete liberation of Africa. Now, I agree with Comrade John Trimble that it is important that political education continues. One of the points that we personally believe in the PAC that the liberation movement in Azania failed on is a political education for the purpose of conscientizing the masses. And we could see it very clearly as we lived, where the masses would call some people comrades, and they never thought they were part of it. So they thought that they were just a passive lot within their own liberation. In fact, one can venture into concluding that the masses in occupied Azania never thought that it was all for them. It was just a show that they were looking at, and almost like a movie that they loved. And today we are where we are because we're caught napping in terms of persistent and consistent political education for the purposes of political consciousness. As scientific socialists, we are aware that it is not the consciousness of man that determines his social conditions, but the social being that determines his consciousness. So if we look at the other critical aspects of Article M, it becomes crucial to understand that after the mission, we then have those 4 historic tasks. And those tasks are to foster, to forge, and to consolidate the bonds of African nationhood in a Pan-Africanist basis. Secondly, to implement effectively the fundamental principle that the dominion or sovereignty over and the dominion or ownership in the whole territory of the continent rests exclusively and inalienably in the indigenous people. Hence, we say as the PAC, Izweletu Africa, our land, Africa, to create 3 and maintain a United States of Africa that will serve and provide a concrete institutional form for the African nation. This now speaks to us having to understand that we need revolutionary parties in the continent, not isolated individual efforts, because they could be crushed. In fact, even if, like Nkrumah did, he left the United Gold Coast Convention and formed the Convention People's Party. But because it so happened that he became the preeminent force when Nkrumah was killed, that marked the death of the CPP. So we need to learn from the lessons of the past and say, how do we improve from the founding fathers? How do we do things differently? Much as the basis of the revolution is the same in terms of complete liberation of Africa, we know that conditions will change. And it is the enemy that changes the conditions. Now, we are not going to subject Pan-Africanism to the enemy's conditions, but will subject the enemy's conditions to our revolutionary thought and our revolutionary theory. The 4th one says to establish an Africanist, socialist, democratic social order, recognizing the primacy of the vital material, intellectual, and spiritual interests of the individual. So with those 4 historic tasks, which would then be followed by historic roles and historic responsibilities in the Pan-Africanist Manifesto, we then have to start thinking afresh and say, what are the various situations, material, social conditions in each and every one of the 50 African countries, and say, we understand that no 2 sets of revolutions will ever be the same. However, there are running critical paths within the social conditions in all African countries. So one of the first tasks is to form revolutionary parties in the continent. And these must be based on the understanding that it is political consciousness, political education of the masses that will topple the current neo-colonial governments and then form a wall around the continent that will protect Africa against imperialist forces from the East and the West. Izweletu.
Thank you, African Modivar. Now, comrades, I'm not going to mention names in particular when asking questions. I will just ask questions, and whoever feels to that they can answer that question or expand on another comrade's answer, they can do that. But then can we please do that orderly as well? Now, a lot of people who, let me say, those in power who say we must celebrate Africa Liberation Day, love erasing the fact that, who say we must celebrate Africa Day, love erasing the fact that why must we actually be commemorating this day, and why are they leaving behind liberation out of the need? So what can we do to ensure that that is not done anymore? And what can we do to actually spread the weight of liberation to the African masses? Because all of us said that the most important thing in the revolution is to actually ensure that people are politically educated. What do we do to politically educate people, especially in these centers of European colonialism, where the masses are now have been relegated into politically illiterate people?
If you allow me, Comrade Nyikiwa, can I go first?
Yes, you can.
All right, thank you very much. I think that's a very important question, because if we read Lenin's What is to be Done, I think that question, not so much the contents of that book, but the question that begs the Azanian revolution and the Africanist revolution would be, what is to be done? And as I intimated earlier on, that whatever happened in '63 at Addis Ababa, in terms of exposing it to critical thinking, was bad. But over time, because time waits for no man and is not static, we actually find ourselves in a situation probably or possibly worse than it was in '63. And I think the most forces of the revolution from a socialist perspective are the working class and also the peasantry. So it becomes our role as revolutionary forces within the continent, having done a concrete analysis of the concrete social conditions of the masses, to take the product of our concrete analysis back to the masses. So when Mao Zedong says from the masses to the masses, he actually spoke a lot of sense to say, we derived our ideology from the conditions of the masses, we must take it back. How do we take it back? We need to meet the masses where they are. And I think at times as revolutionary forces, our revolutionary theory and ideology scales and sails far above the level of the masses. Whether the masses are talking about service delivery. If one goes, for instance, to the Free State, you go to towns like Kroonstad, my hometown, and Welkom, you find that perpetually where I was in last week. During the day, there is no water. At night, there is a little bit of water. Now, if people are denied basic needs like water, then that on its own is a very important social need that we've got to address. So we can rabble rouse on the issues that the masses call service delivery. And we start moving from these issues, the traditional pedagogical approach of Frey that says you move from the known to the unknown. So we need to deal with the masses in terms of where they are, their daily, hourly, minute, and second suffering, and start moving from there until we build steps 1, 2, 3, and ultimately that will enable the masses to arrive at a level of consciousness that says, okay, so this is political, this is social, this is economic, this is cultural. So our whole lives are political. But at this stage, we don't seem to be coming closer to the masses. We speak sometimes even above them. So let us meet the masses where they are and progressively and very steadily move on with the emblem of political education towards ultimately attaining the independence complete of Africa. Izwe lethu.
Thank you, Africa team. Africa, Sobukwe, do you have anything to add?
Mafrika, Nikki, just before Mafrika Sobukwe will come in, I just also want to raise one question, which in particular it's based on the submission that was actually made by Mafrika Sobukwe. That in as much as Africans, we strive for continental unity, which is one of the objectives of Pan-Africanism. Now, my question is, do we still have to have a hope on the existence of the AU, or alternatively, with regard to the regional federations such as SADC, that those are the bodies that should solely be responsible for the attainment of the continental unity in a struggle towards attainment of the Africanist social democracy? My question is also based on the fact that, to me, the existence of the AU and these regional federations, there seems to be the existence of the two blocks that Mafrika Sobukwe has raised, the Monrovia bloc, as opposed to the Casablanca bloc, or the approaches that the two blocks had in advancement of continental unity. That all the independent states, as of 1963, they were ready to abandon their regional independence, such as Ghana, as Nkrumah has said, that they are ready to abandon their independence in favor of African federation or African unity, as opposed to those who advance a gradual unity where they keep their independence up until all African states are independent, and at the later stage, once all the territories are independent, they meet and they establish one federation, which to me, that has not been attained. Now, as the revolutions or as the revolutionaries, do we have to rely on these blocks, or do we have to abandon them and strive to ensure that we attain our own African unity, firstly by contesting, political power in our respective regions, or do we have to establish revolutionary organizations in all parts of the continent before we could even engage on political power in order to ensure that we fight for total liberation of Africa? Because to me, what has been achieved so far since 58 years of the existence of the AU is that we have only been able to can change the color of those that are in power. But economically, there has not been any difference. There is still a lot of European interferences. Mafrika Mulebati has mentioned that even China has joined along the way, that China has become one of the controlling factors of the economic activities in Africa. So my question is, in a nutshell, whether do we have to rely on the existence of the AU, the regional federations such as SADC and others, or do we have to establish our own, revolutionary parties in advancement of African continental unity? Thank you.
Yes, Mafrika Sobukwe. Your mic is off, comrade.
Okay, all right, sorry about that. But of course, the AU in and of itself will never bring us to a united Africa. It won't advance us in the context of the revolutionary unity that we seek. It has to come from from the bottom up. It has to come from the strength of the political lines of the revolutionary forces in the world. Just like the UN, it is a place you can raise and wage ideological struggle that helps raise some people's consciousness. But it is, it is only, I think, coming from those forces on the ground. And I think in the question of the other part of the question of whether one is waits for to have revolutionary organizations in every part of Africa, I don't think it's an either or kind of a scenario. I think that the question of raising and waging struggle in our corners of Africa just shouldn't be isolated. If there's a student struggle or struggling and maybe what's on the table in somewhere like Azania, South Africa, when they're struggling on the question of free education in Azania, it is not just isolated to be something that just the students in Azania are struggling over. It should be always trying to broaden that struggle and find allies in the African and the anti-imperialist world to find support. It's just like the question of Palestine. Question of Palestine is not just the struggle of the Palestinians. It has to become the struggle of all anti-imperialist forces. So the question of land reclamation on the continent of Africa has to be something that is fought and supported by all revolutionary Africans the world over. So when it heats up in Southern Africa or in Azania, when it heats up and the land reclamation struggle is going on, something that is near and dear to the masses of the people, every African and every progressive and revolutionary force in the world has to get behind it. And then we have to not only do it as a mobilization, but we have to then organize around it. So if there's a land reclamation movement going on in Azania, and there's a land reclamation struggle going on in Kenya, and there's a land reclamation struggle going on in other parts of the continent, now there has to be organizational structures put in place to bring those together. So I'm saying that, yes, we must follow some of the local leads, what's going on in our own backyard, but we can't allow it to become isolated.
Okay, thank you. It's good that you mentioned the factor of occupied Palestine, which they are fighting for a struggle which almost every place in Africa and also in the Americas, they are also fighting the struggle for the repossession of their land. Now, how do actually coordinate these struggles and make them be one? Because at the end of the day, the enemy is one. Our enemy as dispossessed people, both in Africa, here in occupied Azania and Kenya, and those in Palestine and also the Cuban trade embargo as well. How do we actually coordinate these struggles to be one so that we can be able to finally say that we are defeating capitalism and imperialism?
I guess since my mic is open and nobody has spoken yet, but okay, let's look at the situation when we were talking about the armed struggles in Africa. All right, how did how did Cuba aid Africa to get its Cuba is way away from Africa. It's on the other side of the world. But Cuba was able to get material aid, human aid in terms of soldiers, and that took organization, it took coordination. These forces, even in terms of when Cuba and the national, when they formed the tricontinental, when they had the tricontinental meeting in Cuba in the 1960s, and they formed OSPA. Part of the process was about organizing to be able to aid each other in the process of struggle. Now, we don't have to go through every detail of how that happens, but believe me, if the globe was in, if the global struggle and the anti-imperialist forces were supporting totally Haiti right now, the Haitian revolution, the second Haitian revolution, would be further along. If all the anti-imperialist forces were actually aiding and organized to aid Haiti, it would be, again, further along. It's about, again, organization, processes of organization, coming together and making plans and executing those plans against our enemies. How do you think that again, I'm going to go back and give the example that is currently going on. How do you think those, despite all of the Zionist power and control of the territories in occupied Palestine, Zionist Israel, out of all that work that they've done to cut off tunnels, to cut off borders from Egypt, to be able to do all of that shutting down things, having borders everywhere, checkpoints everywhere. So how does thousands and thousands of rockets get into Gaza, the Gaza Strip? How do those thousands and thousands of rockets make it into the Gaza Strip if everything is cut off? It's the relationship between political forces, the relationship between Hamas and Hezbollah, the relationship between Iran, Hezbollah, and Hamas, the relationship between Syria and Hamas, and this is the way that that we can see it's possible. It's not impossible. It's possible, very possible, to organize people in a way that they can advance each other's struggle, and they can decide even where the front line and the most important struggles are at any given moment. It just takes more organization. And we have the examples, as I said, that are out there for us to follow.
Thank you.
Africa Nico, can I come and pose a question?
Yes, you can.
Thank you. My question is basically directed to Comrade Tremble. He did touch on the issue of political education as well as consciousness. That is the most fundamental aspect of what is it that needs to be done. Now, my question to Comrade Tremble is that the masses of our people, unfortunately, at this current stage, they are more concerned with job opportunities, they are more concerned with access to healthcare, they are more concerned with access to education and so forth. How do we start with the program of ensuring that they become conscious of what is the real struggle, what is it exactly that we want to attain as the Africans? Because when they speak about, or they are concerned about job opportunities, they still viewed I can give, for example, a recent event where some truck drivers has been, assaulting other truck drivers from other parts of the continent. They view other Africans from other parts of the continent as a threat for their job securities and so forth. Now, how do we conscientize our masses to understand that when we fight for African unity to establish economic independence in the continent, it opens an opportunity for someone who is based in Azania to be able to can travel freely to a country, for example, like Guinea, like Ghana, like Zimbabwe, in order for that person to seek job opportunities, because we as the Africans will be one at that particular stage. Now, how do we ensure that how do we start the program of political education to make our masses to understand that when we fight for African unity, we are not only looking into the interest of a few people who are based in a specific region, but we want to ensure that we advance the life of all the African people, be in the continent or in the diaspora. Thank you, comrade.
I want to tie in the perspective that my comrade earlier raised in terms of how we have to go amongst our communities, and the community that he talked about in particular who had to deal with issues with water. I know Hammarskjöld is right up the road from us, and this is a key issue. When we go to these communities, we have to link the lack of resources that we have locally, the oppression that we may face locally from the police or from other forces. We have to link this clearly with capitalism, imperialism, and neocolonialism. We have to expose the neocolonial realities that we see, for instance, now in Azania. So when we go into these areas, we have to do that. Now, one of the problems we're faced with now is we have few forces. We don't have like thousands of cadre who've been politically trained to go amongst all of these communities. So this is one of the reasons that we have to not only reinforce the political education amongst our cadre, but we have to have active programs to recruit what we call a revolutionary African intelligentsia. This is one of the reasons the APRP has placed such a strong interest and emphasis on building our political education work study circle program, where we actively engage with people who come and hear our talks or visit our website, or to actually then come together in circles from 3 to 12 people, and to start by just being disciplined in terms of how they actually do study, and then take that information out to the community. So this is an important aspect of building the forces that we'll need to go out and be able to more effectively engage in these communities so that they won't create this confusion around Afrophobia. It really disturbs me a lot when I listen to the radio here in occupied Azania, and I hear people getting on complaining about Africans here from Zimbabwe working in restaurants, or complaining about Africans in Nigeria. I mean, it shows the low level consciousness of some of these individuals who are themselves being oppressed by capitalism, imperialism, and neocolonialism, and don't understand the nature of their oppression. But how can we reach more of them? Yes, we have programs like this that reach an audience, but we had to reach further. To reach further, we need more forces. The other thing I want to touch on with this, how we reach out, is what my comrade Sobukwe mentioned in terms of linking this to the broader African agenda. And I'll give 2 examples where I think we can do this. For instance, last weekend, this week coming, the Pan-African Parliament is meeting right here in our neighborhood in Midrand. But do we go there and come in force and say, this is our agenda, Pan-Africanism, all you 5 representatives from every country in Africa, why aren't you addressing this? No, we don't. We need to have that on our agenda as a PAC here. We need to engage Azapo in that as agenda. We need to force the EFF, who has at least 1 representative at the Pan-African Parliament, to raise this within the broader context. One of the reasons that the Pan-African Parliament, along with the AU, is so lame is that over 60% of the funding from to keep them going comes from the European Union. And this is the kind of realities we need to expose, and we need to force these delegates to say, look, you need to address a Pan-African agenda, and you need to support a Pan-African agenda financially. But since the demise of Libya, when Libya was actively engaged in supporting the AU and the Pan-African Parliament, and there was some gestures in that direction, since that demise, the other African countries have not been coming to play. They've been going with the begging bowl of Europe and other UK and US agencies to get funding. And this is why, in fact, the issue with regards to land reclamation in terms of supporting Zimbabwe has not seen the light of day in the Pan-African Parliament, because they know they won't get the continued funding from the EU for the Pan-African Parliament if they do this. These are the things we need to expose. Other thing, in terms of both our agenda here linking with globally, we're sitting here in occupied Azania. Now they've renamed this neighborhood from Pretoria to Tshwane. They renamed recently PE. Why do we still call this South Africa? Why isn't this on the top of our agenda and engaging not only our branches in the PAC, but globally to raise this contradiction? Look at our neighbors. There used to be North Rhodesia, Zambia, used to be South Rhodesia. There was Nyasaland, now it's Malawi. There was Southwest Africa. We're sitting here, the only state, the largest, most populated and most financially strongest state in this whole region, and we're still calling ourselves by a colonial name. These are the things that I think will raise the attention, not only of locally people who have to then think about, well, why is that so? You know, I'm busy blaming Zimbabweans on having jobs in the restaurants, and I'm sitting in a country that still has the colonial name. You know, it'll raise the consciousness not only locally, but it'll put us on the agenda in terms of continentally why we have to move toward a Pan-African unity. It'll raise, this kind of agenda will raise the struggle amongst Africans in the diaspora. So we need to be, this is one of the things that I think the PAC, we need to really take on seriously. I mean, after all, we're the Pan-African Congress of Azania, not the Pan-African Congress of South Africa. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Africa City, with what Africa Shakura said, and what
I think our comrade was trying to get in on that, make a comment on that.
Okay, you can do that.
Am I right? Were you trying to make a comment?
Yeah, you can make a comment on that.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Africa Sobuko, I said you can make a comment on that before I continue.
Not me. I thought our comrade from PAC was trying to make a comment.
Oh, okay, yeah. You can make that comment. You can make that comment.
Okay. Maybe I misread. I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay. Africa City, with what Africa Sobukwe Shukura said, and what Africa John Trimble said, how can we actually ask when actually, let me not say how, because we all know how. When can we, as the PAC here in Gauteng, even though fine, in the PAC we have this bottom-up approach of saying branches must raise issues in a proper manner towards the upper structures. But then let me ask, as if I did not know about the bottom-up approach. So when we us as the PAC in Gauteng do as the comrades whom one of them our branch is named after in 1968 did when they went down through Mozambique, in Villa Perry and coordinated with comrades were in Guinea-Bissau, Mozambique, and Angola. How can we, as now members of when will we, as members of the PAC in Gauteng, coordinate the positive action campaign with the African agenda, with the Africanist agenda, and the anti-imperialist agenda globally? Because at the moment we are not yet doing so. We are still addressing the state. We have not yet addressed all oppressors who are oppressing us people in Africa. When can we do that?
Okay, thank you very much, comrades. And I think it will be my last bite, and I'll chew on it. But I just need to comment that as we discuss these things, I'm becoming much more enlightened in terms of what has to be done. And I'm very excited. I'm definitely thrilled. When we practice things, say in Gauteng as a province, we need to understand that in terms of learning and how we spread knowledge. And as socialists, we believe in rational knowledge. Now, whatever we're going to start in Gauteng, which has to have started like yesterday, but fortunately, we now have the immediate demands of the people and the positive action campaign, which is part of the unfolding campaign. Initiated by the 1949 nation building by the PAC in 1960. And I think Comrade Trimble and I are in agreement in terms of what he mentioned about Hammanskraal and what I mentioned about Welkom and Kroonstad in the Free State. Now, sometimes being in Joburg hides a lot of things for us, because then we are living in a proletariat entity, and the conditions here are not the same as out there. So we need to now start a project in Gauteng where we develop cells, and these cells are those of some of our most advanced cadres, and others have actually left the PAC because they thought that the PAC has gone astray. We just need to get them. And at different localities, Gauteng has got 5 regions. In each region, we have a small cell of ideological cadres who develop a revolutionary theory. And they get around people within the communities who are completely disgruntled with the current order. And some of them actually have the potential to develop into cadres of the revolution. Out there are people who are potential revolutionaries. Out there in the communities, there are people who are sitting idle. When we were in Tshepong on May Day, on the 1st of May, in the Val, we met a 25-year-old man who told us that he is completely discouraged and disgruntled with regard to politics. Now, you need to understand that the 1994 project of the New South Africa, or the so-called Rainbow Nation, was exactly that, to depoliticize the masses, discourage them about any revolution, and just be spectators in terms of how the African National Congress, as the governing, not ruling party, we just be like a messiah and do everything. So I'm very encouraged to say we need to start small in terms of having cells in regions, and those regions will then create cells in the various towns within a region. And after that, we then take that model and supplant it within the various countries in Africa step by step. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We start with a concept and it develops into various ideas into the continent. So the positive action campaign is a positive step in the right direction, and it can develop. We never want to start perfectly, because nothing that human beings do can be perfect, because they themselves are not perfect. But we start with a modicum of revolutionary theory and put it into practice. And then from that practice, our theory develops. So it's from, all theory comes from practice, and it goes on to self-practice again. Easily.
Thank you, Africa Muliba. Comrades, we no longer have a time. Otherwise, if it was according to me, would sit here the entire night and communicate and still talk about what is to be done, and how can we actually ensure that we stop commemorating Africa Liberation Day and finally start celebrating Africa Day as the day where Africa is finally free from imperialism and neocolonialism and capitalism. Africa Class Mabot, can you please give us, as the secretary of the branch, can you please give us your closing remarks?
Thank you, Mafrika Nikiwa. Comrades, unfortunately, we had come to the conclusion of our program, as we had planned it to last for an hour and a half. And we really want to take this opportunity and thank the comrades of All Africa People's Revolutionary Party to have joined us in this very progressive discussion. And Comrade Chairperson of the PAC in Gauteng Province, Mafrika Mulibadzi, we really want to take this opportunity and thank you for making those presentations. I think Comrade Trumbull has gave us a mandate actually as a branch to say that we cannot be seen trying to liberate Africa or Azania if we can't even start by, making some noise or waging some struggle to have the very same name of our country to be changed. We cannot wait until the PAC has attained political or state political power to change the name. We have to make noise. We have to engage all the relevant structures to make it a point that the name change is actually attained even before as the PAC could attain state political power. Comrade Sobukwe, we really want to thank you for making time to be with us this evening. And we want to promise that as the PAC Gerald Gondo branch in Tshwane, we will try by all means to forge all solidarity with the All Africa People's Revolutionary Party in future programs to ensure that this particular engagement doesn't end today. It's something that we have to extend throughout the period of our existence. And we will also try and forge some links with other revolutionary parties in other parts of Africa to ensure that the agenda for total liberation of Africa is attained. And as you have said, Mafrika Sobukwe, that the struggle cannot be isolated. It's something that has to be integrated with all other forces that exist in the continent. So we'll have to forge all the links that we can in order to attain or in order to work in solidarity with all the revolutionary Africans towards the attainment of total liberation of Africa. Comrade, we want to take this opportunity and thank you for your time. And we want to wish you good evening and all the best in our respective lives. Thank you, comrades.
Thank you.
He's late too.
Yes.
Yeah, Africa.
Africa.
He's
related to. Yes. Because it's not just your land, it's our land. Africa is ours.
No, it's our land.
Yes.
Thank you.
Once again, thank you, comrades. Comrades who are viewing this from Facebook, if you are in occupied Azania, can you please contact the pages where you are watching this stream from, and ask to join a branch of the PAC out there, because without you, we cannot actually get the liberation of Azania. And also, can you, anyone, whichever part of the world you are in, contact the All African People's Revolutionary Party and ask to be part of the study of their study circles, because there you will actually get a chance to be educated and be involved in the total liberation of Africa, of Africans in Africa and Africans outside Africa. Thank you, comrade. Is it?
Yeah, Africa.
Oh.